Okay, so let's just jam on E major 7 going to A major 7. Give me something groovy in E major, BassBot.
E major, affirmative.
BassBot, that's super lame.
Noted, increasing speed.
No, BassBot, no, freeze, abort. BassBot, you sound terrible.
You are in error. I executed the E major scale with perfect precision.
If learning bass scales is making you play like that, or you think they're just too boring to practice, you're going about it all wrong. But if you learn scales the right way, they give you a huge shortcut to actually making better music. In your face, BassBot! In this lesson, I'm going to teach you a super easy way to learn scales, but you're also going to learn how to avoid becoming a BassBot and dying of boredom when you practice them. Whether you're just starting with scales or you've been struggling for years to make sense of them, I'll show you how to create actual music from your scale practice that you can inject into your bass playing right after watching this video. Let's do it! I've seen a lot of students try to learn a bunch of scales all at once. Big mistake.
You made a big mistake. Huge.
There it is.
The trick to making scales work for you is to really learn and understand one or two scales before worrying about more. Otherwise, you spread your focus way too thin. But if you focus on just one, maybe two scales at a time, you'll be able to fully squeeze the musical juice out of them before you go on to learn more. If you think just knowing one scale sounds boring, then check out some of the things I can do with just a little old E major scale. If you really get a scale into your ears, you'll not only memorize the scale, but you'll actually be able to play better bass lines, take better solos, and better understand the music you listen to. But first, you need somewhere to start, so I'm going to show you a super simple shape that you can use to play the major scale. A scale is just a specific bunch of notes we pick from the 12 notes of the musical alphabet. It helps give you a more cohesive sound, like how painters put just a few colors on a palette to help create a clear style instead of using every single color and making a mess.
Okay, let's have some more fun.
You can skip to this time code if you already know the major scale. We're going to learn a C major scale, which means we need to start on a C, so we'll use the 8th fret of the E string. And then we're going to play a shape, which is just a visual way to find the notes of the scale, which you can move around the fretboard. Here's what this major scale shape looks like. There are other shapes you can use to find the major scale too, but this is a classic one that'll work great and set you up to make music in a minute. So start with your middle finger on the 8th fret of the E string, and then pinky finger on the 10th fret of the E string. Then we go to the A string, index finger on the 7th fret, middle on the 8th fret, and pinky on the 10th fret. And then we finish up on the D string, index finger on the 7th fret, ring finger on the 9th fret, and pinky on the 10th fret. So again, that's middle, pinky, index, middle, pinky, index, ring, pinky. And then same thing back down, pinky, ring, index, pinky, middle, index, pinky, middle. If you need to do little micro shifts so your hand looks more like this, rather than stretching all the way across the 4 frets of that position, that's totally fine. You can still use the same fingering even if your hands are small. Here's the cool thing about shapes on bass. You can easily move them around to get into other keys. Just find the root note or starting note of the key you want to be in on the E or the A string and then play your shape. So if I want an A major scale, I just find an A. I could use the 5th fret of the E string, that'd be my root note, and then play the same shape. Middle, pinky, index, middle, pinky, index, ring, pinky. I could do the same thing with an A on the 12th fret of the A string. I started on an A, so it's an A major scale. Or if I want to be in the key of E, I can just find myself an E on the 7th fret of the A string and then play my shape. Anyone on Earth can learn this shape pretty easily, even robots. But that's where a lot of people stop with learning bass scales. But we haven't even made any music yet. Sure, you technically know the notes of the scale, but if you stop here, you'll either end up sounding all scaly like BassBot, or it won't even affect your playing. You'll just, when you're practicing, you just play the shape up, and then you play it down, and you play it up, play it down, and you just bore yourself to death in the process. But making actual music is the whole point, so let's get started. There are many paths you could take to start making music with scales. I have a suggestion that's specifically geared towards us bass players. Practice playing melodies from existing songs. Bass players have a unique challenge in getting all the colors of a new scale into our ears because there's not a lot of room for exploring all the different colors of a scale in bass lines like these. Taking a break from bass lines and learning melodies like vocal or guitar parts helps you in 4 ways. 1, it'll free your mind. Unlike a typical bass line, a melody doesn't have to start or end on a root note, and they don't start on beat 1 necessarily. This gives you a lot more room to explore the sounds of the scale and will also expand your reference for melodic and rhythmic ideas. 2, it'll make it practical. You'll see scales in action in actual music, so instead of having a gap between your practice and your actual music making, like most students, you'll be making the connection. Connection is made. 3, you'll learn mini shapes. Instead of just knowing the scale as this one big shape, you'll also learn little fragments within that sound cool, that are mega useful for jamming and improvising, coming up with bass lines, and I'll explore that with you in a minute. And 4, playing melodies is fun. Playing real music is way more satisfying than just drilling scales, unless you're a robot.
Fun does not compute.
There are literally thousands of melodies you could learn that use the major scale, but here are a few examples that you could practice.
Don't stop believing. Hold on to that street light.
I wrote out a bunch more major scale melodies for you to play with, and the links are in the description of this video. And eventually you can find these yourself and just use your ears to tell you what scale you're hearing in a song, but in the meantime you'll have to trust your friendly bass teacher. Big hint, whatever melodies you learn, make sure that you analyze how the notes fit into the scale. Don't just learn mindlessly from tabs. So let's say that I'm learning Deck the Halls, classic Christmas song. I don't want to just learn those notes from a tab. I want to think, okay, I'm in E major, I'm starting on the 5th note of the scale, da 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 da, and walking down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1. So I want to know what number notes those are in the scale, because then I'll be able to move it around to other keys. Or say I'm learning. Then I want to know that I'm starting on the root, I'm in G, I'm starting on a G, I'm going to root to the 5th note of the scale, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, up to the octave, the ending note of the scale, back down to the 5th, same thing again, and then 4, 3, 4, 2. That way I have these little mini shapes in my head, so if I want something to sound like Deck the Halls or Star Wars, I can access that even if I'm in another key. This way you'll start building a database of real-world scale knowledge that you can actually apply to your bass playing, which is what we'll do now. So now you know that the major scale is full of melodic and bassline potential, but how do you get started making basslines with it? We usually don't just play the scale forwards and backwards in a song, although there are exceptions.
Does compute.
It can be tricky to work a scale into your playing though, because if you play the wrong scale notes at the wrong time when you're supposed to be laying it down with root notes, you won't support the band properly.
See the stones in your eyes. See the thorn twist in your side.
The key is to start from the foundation. That means playing root notes on beat 1 or wherever the chord changes are, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Then you can add flavor with the scale around that foundation, which will be easier when you have some experience learning melodies and hearing what sounds good. So let's check out some examples of great bassists who have done this before us. There's some debate over whether it was James Jamerson or Bob Babbitt playing bass on this track. To my ear, it sounds like Bob Babbitt. Either way, it's a great bass line that uses the major scale to add some flavor around the root notes. We're in the key of F using an F major scale, and we're using the same scale shape as we learned earlier. You just have to adjust your eyeballs to accept the open strings into the shape and tweak your fingering a little bit, but it's the same arrangement of notes. Our 4 root notes are F, G, B flat, and C, and we hit those right on the chord changes, which are on beats 1 and 3. But if that was all the bass line was, it's kind of boring. So Bob Babbitt added some flavor. There's an A connecting the G, A, B flat to the B flat, which is from the F major scale shape, right? 1, 2, 3, that's the 3rd note. And then on the C chord, he plays a classic Motown bass fill where he goes 5th, 6th, octave, octave, which is another example of a mini shape you could memorize and then add into your own lines to get the same flavor. Tom Hamilton, killer bass player, bringing us some tasty major scale action, this time in the key of A major, and we can use the same scale shape as before. Our root notes are A, E, F sharp, and D, and again we're hitting those right on the chord changes, but he put some other scale notes in between to keep the momentum and make it sound interesting. So we go root, octave 3rd, 4th to the E, and then we dip down to the 2nd note of the scale, back up to the E, which is the 5th, to the F sharp, which is the 6th, walk down through the 5th to get to the 4th, which is D, and then a little 4th, 5th to get us back to the root.
Since I've got you on my mind.
That's Aston, Family Man Barrett, tearing it up on the bass. He played on most of Bob Marley's music. We're in A major again, and our root notes are just A and D because the bass rests on the E chord that the guitar plays. So again, he could have just played root notes, but it's so much more melodic with these scale fragments, or mini shapes. So we keep the root notes right on the chord changes, but on the A we add 1, 2, 3, 1. And then on the D, which is the 4th note of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, we go 4, 5, 6, 4, which is the same mini shape repeated up a string. This is just a starting point at looking at how these bass lines work. There are lots more layers to the theory, which I get into in more detail in my Beginner to Badass course over at bassbuzz.com. But real quick, let's look at how I could use what we just learned to come up with a decent bass line for that intro jam that BassBot butchered. So here's that jam again. So the guitar is just going from an E major chord to an A major chord over and over. So our roots are E and A, which we're going to hit right on those changes. And maybe I'll add the and of 2, which the kick drum is hitting. So that's my foundation. It's not the only foundation, but it's one good option. And there's nothing wrong with this. It's not necessarily boring or wrong to play a bass line like this. But if I wanted to add more flavor, I could use the E major scale. I could just make something up. Just whatever I want to do from the scale shape. Or I could steal ideas from the bass lines we just learned. So what if I try to steal a bass fill from Bob Babbitt? Or I could just steal the stirred up bass line. Doesn't work that well at this tempo, but it's just something I can try. I could tweak the rhythm a little bit. Or I could steal some fills from Tom Hamilton. So I've got all these options I can explore just from learning little parts of 3 songs. That's the power of learning scales non-robotically. So how do you take all this info and get the major scale into your playing? Here's a 3-step, 15-minute practice routine you can try to get you making music ASAP. Step 1, robot stage. The first step is just to know this shape really well so that you can find the notes of the scale without struggling. So every practice session, just drill this shape like a robot for 5 minutes or so until you have it memorized. And make sure you're using good fretting technique while you do that, which you can get help with from my 5 levels of bass finger exercise video. But don't stop there.
Stop me now.
Step 2, melody. Pick and learn a melody or bass line that uses the scale. I wrote out a bunch for you in the description, and practice it until you know it really well. And make sure that you're analyzing how the notes fit into the scale and not just learning by rote. 5 or 10 minutes at a time is great here, although more is even better if you've got it. Step 3 is create. Spend your last 5 minutes coming up with some of your own bassline ideas using the major scale. And remember to start with a foundation where you're laying root notes down right on the chord changes, and then use the scale to fill in around that foundation. And if you just Google jam tracks major scale, you can find hundreds of options for you to jam over and come up with your own bassline ideas. There's always more to learn with a scale, new sounds to find, new shapes to explore, so you're never going to give up learning the major scale. But once you've fully memorized the scale shape and you've used it to learn a bunch of songs and crank out your own bass lines, you've reached a solid level of proficiency. Yay! And you're ready to move on to a new scale and repeat the process. And you're officially a human, not a robot. BassBot, I know I've been a little rough on you in this lesson. Why don't you take us out with some of your music?
Affirmative. Binary solo.
0 0 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0 0 0 1 1 0 0 0 0 0 0 1 1 1 0 0 0 0 1 1 1 1.
Come on, sucker, lick my battery.